We now face a changed economic landscape and a changing set of behaviours going with it. ASDA recently analysed the behaviour patterns of petrol purchases at their checkout pumps. It's gone through a dramatic change. People are no longer filling tanks up and spending £40, £60, whatever. They are now buying in units of £10 or £15 or £20. That is the beginning of what this is actually all about. You never can tell. We are now in a period where people are acting and behaving in a very different way. And the title of this is called The Rise of the Accidental Entrepreneur. Is Scotland ready for a new kind of business? And to illustrate that, what I would like to talk about is both a very informative tale and a cautionary one. In early 2009, I work with people who move from employees to entrepreneurs. Done a lot of stuff in a lot of the most deprived parts of England. In fact, the list covered, they published a list of entries into accident and emergency for drug, alcohol abuse and all things. I'd been to all top 6, which was really quite interesting. Now, what happened was, February 2009, we got a piece of work in the northeast of England. And it was about how can we get more people in the public sector and working for other people out into starting their own business. Because, according to the academic research, which is always to be treated with undue reverence, that is really where it's all about. If you can get people with high skills and qualifications starting their own business, they will go on to start higher growth businesses. Some of you might have come across a piece of work called the Vital 6%. How we need to focus on people who will start massively high growth businesses. It doesn't actually explain why, but it's part of the current thinking that's going down in England just now. The agenda, and it came through with John Swinney's comments, which is that Scotland, the focus will be on growth and internationalism. But where's that going to come from? And how will that happen in a period of economic change and, to a certain extent, turmoil? So, returning to the northeast of England, the piece of work was looking at what they called organisational captives. How can we get people out of one sector into another? We worked in this working with people for nearly 18 months, meeting people, interviewing people, but more importantly, running programs to see why they would start a business and why they wouldn't start a business. Why was this important? Because the economy of the northeast, like the economy of Scotland, is heavily dependent on the public sector and chunks of corporate sector. What we found was actually quite scary. But before I tell you that, I want to put out the cautionary tale now. The first bit was, at the end of the report, we're talking about the whole thing, the person that had commissioned it had actually said, very enthusiastic about all of this. And I said, well, Taz, you're what we're talking about. You've got a degree. You're working for an agency. Why are you not starting your own business? And she said, oh, I love what I'm doing. And I went, yeah, but what happens if a P45 comes along? She said, oh, well, I have to think about, my ideas. And I went, uh-huh. And we kind of went through the beginning of the process. And she said, and I said, and then she went, do you know what? I'd want to do something completely different. I wouldn't want to do what I'm doing. I'd want something that built round about my life, my family, and going in a different direction. So when I put the report in, which was in March 2010, we were all talking about the implications. And somebody said, well, what really do we have to do to get more people to start businesses and leave public sector, leave corporate sector? And I said, jokingly, make them all redundant. And how everybody laughed. So when Taz got her P45 last week from One North East Regional Development Agency, that was an indication of what is actually happening. So they were actually part of, nobody knew what was going to happen as a result of the change in economic policies down at Whitehall. And that is the basis for all of this. So what have I really come up with? I want to take you through some things and actually throw some ideas open. Because what we're saying was, is Scotland open for a new kind of business? And the answer to that is, not really. Is there the potential out there? undoubtedly, I was taking part in Call K. Adams this morning about what stops people from starting businesses. They didn't know what was going to happen. There was the opening speaker had been made redundant 3 years ago and had now set up their own business. The only person that phoned in and praised the virtues of a 9-to-5 job and why she liked it worked for the Department for Work and Pensions. So, but then she too was quite shocked at the prospect that she may not have a job, because that's what we're going. The key things we found were this. There's an iceberg, or it's like a big chunk of rock. At the bottom, there was public, then there was corporate, then there was kind of education, health, all moving in there, and then there was small business, small number at the very top. The first problem was there was absolutely zero, well, 0.009% of movement from people going into the public sector and engaging with people that started businesses. In other words, if you went in and started a corporate life, you ended up by and large a corporate person. And if anybody says working for private sector business makes you more enterprising than working for the public sector, there's no evidence whatsoever to support that. In fact, we found MBA students were the most unenterprising people, risk-averse, greasy pole climbers you could possibly meet. And one wonderful phrase from one person said, he said, oh, well, I'm going to start a business. Well, what's stopping you? Oh, it won't work out on paper. I can't get the business model to work. Well, that's fine. Go and put that to Alan Sugar and see how he focuses on your comments. So we've got public, no movement. So you start within a local authority and you end up within a local authority or a regional agency. Every regional development agency in England will be gone completely by the 2012, but they're more or less gone just now. The other thing that happened was because of this, people were not speaking to each other. Now, what we're getting to is this relation to how does this affect Scotland? And the message was coming very clear. First of all, if you worked in one sector and you only ever met anybody else, or the corporate sector and you only ever met other corporate people, you never met anybody that had started their own business. In fact, the irony of what happened in One North East is the enterprise team were actually meeting fewer people running their own businesses in 2010 than they were in 2004 when they were underway. They were being moved away from this. They were moved more into management. That had a huge implication because the issue facing Scotland and England is not structure, which is what is the support from Scottish Enterprise, what is the support from Business Gateway? It is culture. And the key thing that's coming out is we are now facing huge chunks of public sector and corporate redundancies with people in law firms. There are law firms out there that are paying middle-ranking solicitors off to save costs. What do these middle-ranking solicitors go and do? Well, if you're smart, you take as many clients as you possibly can, slash your overhead, and start another company. Because the other thing that happens at a time of economic chaos is that entrepreneurs capitalize on that and new businesses start to emerge. So, key thing, no movement, big implications for Scotland. The entrepreneurship agenda is back on the scene with calls for all sorts of things. So that brings me to the next thing that we came out with. No business ever started with a plan. One of the key things is people want to talk to other people about starting businesses. What has happened in Scotland is that's got confused with the Business Gateway agenda. It was not the enterprise agenda. If growth is to come in Scotland, it's going to come from lots and lots and lots of businesses starting. But that can only happen because people are comfortable in trying and doing all of these things. The culture change. Nobody's ever started with a plan. And no other country ever started an enterprise revolution with a government-led call for a national enterprise action framework with pipelines, diagnostics, customer-client relationship management system. Which brings us very neatly to last week's call for, and I don't get this, The Entrepreneur Exchange calls on the government to do something to help create more entrepreneurs. Don't do it your bloody self, guys. You don't need it. That's what's coming out with the nub of all of this. It's actually doing something and having the freedom. Paradoxically, that is actually what's happening across the border. And one of the other things that's now moving up the agenda is, again, culture or structure. Does Scotland need Business Gateway? Well, the answer in England they came up with was, Doug Richards, ex-Dragon's Den, looked at Business Link, came up with the conclusion it wasn't really worth the money. Such was the overwhelming stampede on the ground when people said we're closing, when the politicians said we're closing Business Link, that it goes by November 2011. Nothing. There will be a website and a call centre. Every Business Link advisor is now facing redundancy. And there are some organisations that with monumental TUPE issues as they've taken people over. But that's what happened. So that's something for consideration. Does Scotland actually need a Business Gateway when if you do a YouTube search, you will find 11,416 results for doing a business plan? You will also find that the Glasgow Entrepreneurs Network in LinkedIn has 2,000 members. Back to this culture thing, changing economic landscape, changing systems. So what we've come up with at the end was, how is this all going? Well, what the real thing of all the work that happened, and this is Scotland open for a new kind of business? And the answer is probably not. I think there's a desire for it to be, but thinking is woolly, and thinking is basically what appears to be happening is that the intellectual think in Scotland, in the Scottish government, well, the civil service is drifting up from England, where the real focus has been, thank God we kept Michael Heseltine's old papers on enterprise allowance, enterprise zones, and other things, because that's the basis of the new policy down south. It is complete, somebody called it Jurassic Park. Growth will not come from that. Why? Because people start business. There is a mismatch. On one level is that we're finding is, actually it's about getting out of the way. But on the other, it's about recognizing that there are new types of businesses. The lawyer that leaves the corporate structure can get themselves a Mac, an iPad, and a phone, and start doing business in a coffee shop.